Hi there tonight. We are traveling back through the mists of time, not to a grand battle or a royal coronation, but to the quiet, hidden corners of daily life. Picture it, you're standing in the damp, clinging fog of the English countryside somewhere around the 13th century. Before you, rising from the gray landscape like a set of broken teeth, is a stone castle. It's both a fortress and a home, but it's a home governed by rules you can't possibly comprehend. The air smells of wood smoke, wet earth, and something vaguely unpleasant you'd rather not identify. Forget what you've seen in movies. This is a world of shadows, superstitions, and silent laws where one wrong move could be your last. Honestly, you probably won't survive this, but it's worth a try. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where and when you're listening from, so feel free to post your city and local time in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mud is trying to steal your shoes. With every step, it makes a thick, sucking sound, a greedy noise that seems to echo the hunger of this land. You've been walking for days, and your destination is finally in sight, but it offers little comfort. The castle doesn't look welcoming. It looks like it was designed by someone who deeply distrusted the world, which, to be fair, was a pretty reasonable stance back then. The main defense, the first brutal welcome, is the Gatehouse. It's a castle in miniature, a hulking stone beast squatting at the end of a narrow causeway. Two round towers connected by a thick archway stare down at you like the eyes of a giant. This isn't just a door. This is a statement, and it's your first test. The most fundamental taboo of any castle is the threshold itself. You don't just cross it. The space between the wild, untamed world outside and the ordered, hierarchical world inside is considered a perilous, almost supernatural zone. People believed that evil spirits, bad luck, and disease, the ever-present terror of the plague, all lingered at these entry points, waiting for a careless soul to carry them inside. This wasn't just a quaint superstition. It was a deeply ingrained fear. To approach a castle gate was to approach a membrane between worlds, and you had to have the proper credentials, both physical and spiritual. There is no welcome mat here, no friendly bell to ring. There is only a slit in the stone, high above an arrow loop, from which a pair of unseen eyes are certainly watching you. You stop at a respectful distance, your heart thudding a little faster. You are expected to call out to announce yourself, your purpose, and who you serve. Your voice seems small against the sheer stone mass. You shout your name, trying to sound confident, and not at all like a person whose last hot meal was 3 days ago. Silence. Then a gruff voice echoes from above. It's the watchman, the gatekeeper of this little kingdom. He asks you a series of questions. Think of it as the medieval version of a two-factor authentication, only if you get it wrong, the consequence isn't a locked account, but a crossbow bolt. You must answer clearly, without hesitation. Any stuttering, any shifty glances could be interpreted as deceit. This verbal dance is the first ritual. It's a taboo to be silent, and an even greater taboo to lie. The guard isn't just listening to your words. He's judging your soul by the sound of your voice. While you wait for his verdict, you look more closely at the stone around the great archway. If you knew what to look for, you might spot some strange scratches in the rock. Here and there, carved into the jamb, are what look like daisy wheels, geometric circles of overlapping petals, or maybe the letters V intertwined. These are apotropaic marks, sometimes called witch marks. This is a fascinating bit of folk magic, a quiet rebellion of ancient belief against the formal religion of the church. Each mark is a little prayer, in stone, a ward to turn away evil. They were a kind of spiritual flypaper intended to trap any malevolent entity that tried to follow you in. You are literally standing in a spiritual gauntlet. Finally, a creak and a groan from within. You've passed the first test, but the process is far from over. The true genius of the late medieval gatehouse, a feature perfected by kings like Edward I in his Welsh castles, was its layered defense. It wasn't just a gate, it was a killing box. As you're beckoned forward, you step out of the fog and into the deep shadow of the gatehouse passage. The temperature drops. The air grows still. High above you are dark slots in the ceiling. Murder holes, they're cheerfully called. They weren't for pouring boiling oil that was a Hollywood myth and far too expensive, but they were perfect for dropping rock spears or just foul scalding water onto unwelcome guests. The walls beside you are studded with more arrow slits angled to give crossbowmen a perfect field of fire into the passage. You are completely, utterly at their mercy. A heavy wooden door slams shut behind you. A moment later, a groaning, rattling shriek echoes through the passage as the portcullis, a huge iron grill, descends its spikes, biting into the stone floor. You are now trapped. This is the final checkpoint. Another set of guards appears from a doorway, their faces grim and suspicious. They look you over their eyes, missing nothing. They might check your bag, their hands patting you down, not just for weapons, but perhaps for signs of sickness, the dreaded boils, or rashes that signaled the Black Death. Medieval hygiene wasn't great, but their version of a background check was brutally efficient. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of the increasingly elaborate gatehouse in the late medieval period was purely military, or if it also served as a powerful theatrical statement of the Lord's wealth and authority. Standing here, in this cold, echoing tunnel of stone, you suspect it was both. It's designed to awe you, to intimidate you, to remind you that you are a very small, very soft creature in a world of stone and iron. It's a taboo to show fear, but an even bigger one to show arrogance. You must be humble, patient, and above all, obedient. Only then will the inner portcullis rise, granting you entry into the castle proper. You've crossed the threshold. You've survived the gatehouse. The rules are only going to get stranger from here. The heavy inner portcullis groans open, and you're finally released from the stone throat of the gatehouse. You blink, stepping into the relative brightness of the inner bailey. The air here is thick with the business of life. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings from a nearby shed, mixing with the lowing of cattle and the shouts of stable hands. The smell is a complex tapestry of hay manure, wood smoke, and baking bread. After the sterile, intimidating silence of the passage, you just survived. This chaotic mess of human and animal activity feels almost comforting. You follow a steward, a man with a self-important walk and a chain of office who leads you across the muddy courtyard towards a large building grander than the rest. Its tall, arched windows suggest its importance. This is the Great Hall, the heart of the castle, and your next trial is about to begin. As you climb a set of wide stone stairs and pass through a set of heavy oak doors, the assault on your senses is immediate. A wave of heat noise and smells washes over you. The hall is a vast cavern of a room, its ceiling, a dark forest of smoke-blackened timber beams high above. A huge fire crackles in a hearth big enough to roast an ox, which, judging by the smell, is exactly what's happening somewhere nearby. The air is hazy with smoke that stings your eyes, as the concept of an efficient chimney is still a few architectural innovations away. Down the length of the room, long trestle tables are packed with people, their voices echoing in the cavernous space, creating a dull roar like the sea. And the floor. The floor is covered in a thick layer of rushes. It's a taboo to stare, but you can't help but notice that these sweet-smelling reeds are mixed with old bones, scraps of food, and other less identifiable debris. A friendly dog trots past with something that looks suspiciously like a chicken leg from last Tuesday's feast. You make a mental note to watch where you step. The steward leads you forward, and you quickly realize this room is a living map of the social order. At the far end, on a raised platform called a dais, sits the high table. This is where the Lord and his family dine along with any guests of noble birth. Their physical elevation is no accident. It is a constant, visible reminder to everyone in the hall of who is in charge. They are literally above the common fray. The quality of their clothes, the tapestries hanging behind them, and the very light from the windows that seems to favor them all scream one thing: power. Your place in this room, you will soon discover, is the single most important fact about your existence right now. It's a taboo of the highest order to choose your own seat. Your worth is about to be publicly declared for all to see. This is where the true terror of the Great Hall lies. It's not about finding a good spot near the fire. It's about being put in your place. The great social divider, the arbiter of status, is a surprisingly small object, the salt cellar. Usually, a large and ornate container, often made of silver or pewter, and sometimes shaped like a ship called a nef. It would be placed on the high table or near it. Your position relative to this object defines you. To be seated above the salt means you are closer to the Lord's table, a position of honor. To be seated below the salt is to be lumped in with the general crowd of household retainers, soldiers, and lesser visitors. There is no middle ground. The usher, or marshal, who is now squinting at you, has the most stressful job in the castle. He's part bouncer, part wedding planner, and he has to remember the precise social standing of every single person and arrange them without causing a diplomatic incident. A misplaced knight or an insulted merchant could lead to days of simmering resentment. He points you to a spot on a long bench at a table quite a distance from the dais. You are unequivocally below the salt. It's a taboo to complain or even look disappointed. You must accept your assigned place with a nod of gratitude. To do otherwise would be an act of rebellion, a questioning of the Lord's judgment and the entire social structure. You slide onto the rough-hewn bench, shoulder to shoulder, with a grizzled man-at-arms who smells faintly of wet leather and ale. Across from you, a young page is trying and failing to get a serving girl's attention. The noise is immense, a cacophony of clattering wooden plates, shouted conversations, and barking dogs, scavenging in the filthy rushes. You're pretty sure you'd need a megaphone to gossip with the table next to you, which is probably a built-in safety feature. Historians still argue whether the strict seating arrangements were primarily for maintaining social order, or if they also served as a very public and constant loyalty test, forcing individuals to visibly accept their place in the Lord's hierarchy every single day. Looking around at the sea of faces, all slotted into their designated places, you feel the crushing weight of that hierarchy. You are a tiny cog in a vast and unforgiving machine. The room is a public ledger of honor, and your entry has just been written in for all to see. Your stomach rumbles, and you hope that being this far from the Lord doesn't mean the food will run out before it reaches you. You sit hunched on the hard bench, trying to make yourself as small as possible. The sheer volume of the great hall, which felt like a chaotic party from the doorway, now feels like 100 separate judgments being passed at once. Being placed so firmly below the salt is a public statement, and you feel the sting of it. Your goal now is simple. Eat whatever food makes its way down the table, attract no attention, and blend into the smoky, noisy background. But fate, it seems, has other plans. There's a lull in the conversation at the high table. The Lord, a man with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that seem to miss nothing, leans over and says something to the steward who brought you in. The steward nods and points directly at you. A young page no older than 12 detaches from the dais and begins weaving his way through the tables, heading straight for you. Every hope you had of a quiet, anonymous evening evaporates. The page arrives and murmurs, "The Lord wishes to speak with you." It's not a request. You stand up, your knees feeling strangely weak. Now you must perform the long, lonely walk from the cheap seats up to the dais. It feels like a mile. Every eye in the hall follows you. You are acutely aware of the squelch of the rushes under your feet, the hard stares of the men you pass, the sudden quiet that has fallen over the tables nearest the dais. This is a performance, and you are the unwilling star. You remember the stern faces of the guards at the Gatehouse and realize this is just a different kind of interrogation, one conducted with social customs instead of stone walls. As you approach the raised platform, a complex and terrifying list of rules begins to scroll through your mind. This is where the most dangerous taboos reside, in the delicate art of speaking to your betters. First, the titles. You must address him as my lord. Not sir, not your honor, and certainly not his name. To his wife seated beside him in a fine velvet gown, it must be my lady. Using the wrong form of address is not a simple faux pas. It is a profound insult, a failure to acknowledge their God-given station and your own lowly place in the pecking order. It's the verbal equivalent of spitting on his shoes. You stop a respectful distance from the high table and give a slight bow, your head lowered. And here is the next, and perhaps most crucial taboo. You must not, under any circumstances, hold the Lord's gaze. Direct, sustained eye contact is for equals or for challengers. To a lord, it is a sign of insolence, an aggressive and shockingly intimate act. Imagine a job interview where you are explicitly told to stare at the interviewer's tie the entire time. It's that unnatural and that important. You are permitted a brief, fleeting glance at his face to show you are paying attention, but your gaze must then drop to the floor, to the table, to anywhere but his eyes. Your entire posture must scream humility, hands clasped loosely in front of you. No fidgeting, no shifting your weight. You are a statue awaiting a command. You are the traveler from the south, the Lord asks. His voice is calm, but carries easily in the now hushed hall. You wait a beat to ensure he has finished speaking. Interrupting is another capital crime in the court of etiquette. "I am my lord," you say, your voice sounding thin to your own ears. "The roads are safe." Mostly, "my lord." With caution. Each answer must be concise. You do not elaborate unless asked. You do not offer your opinion. You do not, heaven forbid, ask a question of your own. You are a repository of information to be drawn from, at his will, nothing more. As you stand there enduring the silent scrutiny, you notice the only person at the high table who seems unbound by these rules. The court fool, a man in a mismatched tunic and a cap with bells, is leaning over and whispering something in the Lord's ear. His expression, a theatrical mask of conspiracy. The Lord cracks a smile. The fool is the exception that proves the rule, a figure whose licensed idiocy gives him the freedom to speak truth, to mock, and to stare anyone he pleases in the eye. He can make a joke about the Lord's new bald spot that would see you fitted for a complimentary stay in the darkest part of the dungeons. Historians still argue whether these strict codes of conduct were a genuine reflection of a Lord's perceived divine right and untouchable status, or a more practical tool of courtly theater designed to manage a household full of ambitious and potentially treacherous knights and nobles. By forcing everyone to perform these rituals of submission daily, a lord could constantly reinforce his own power and nip any budding rebellion in the bud. It was social control disguised as good manners. The lady leans forward slightly. Did you bring news of the harvest from your region traveler? Your brain scrambles for a moment. New speaker, new rules. You shift your respectful, downcast gaze in her general direction. I did, my lady. The rains were timely. It is said it will be a good yield. Good, the Lord says, his tone final. It's a dismissal. The audience is over. You may return to your meal. You offer another bow. My lord, my lady. You then begin the careful process of backing away for several steps before it is considered polite to turn your back on them. You walk back to your bench, the warmth of 100 stares on your back. You sit down, your body trembling slightly with the release of tension. The man-at-arms beside you gives you a sideways glance, a silent acknowledgement of the ordeal you just passed. You've navigated the treacherous currents of noble conversation without sinking. Now perhaps you can finally eat. Now that the terror of your personal audience with the Lord has subsided, a new and more primal concern takes over hunger. Servants begin to move through the hall, carrying huge wooden platters piled high with food. The distribution is a miniature reenactment of the feudal system itself. The most lavish dishes, delicacies like roasted swan peacock or elaborately spiced meats, are presented first to the high table. Then the lesser, but still substantial joints of roast beef, pork, and venison begin their journey down the tables of those sitting above the salt. By the time the food reaches your lowly section of the hall, the choices are more limited. A platter is unceremoniously thumped down near you, bearing chunks of dark bread, a communal bowl of thick, brownish pottage, a kind of vegetable and grain stew, and several pieces of greasy roasted mutton. It's not elegant, but it's food. You look for a plate, but there isn't one. Instead, you are handed a thick square slab of stale bread. This is a trencher, the medieval world's ingenious and entirely biodegradable dinner plate. This is a well-established historical fact. Plates, as we know them, were a luxury for the very wealthy. For you, the bread will have to do. The idea is to place your meat and a dollop of pottage onto the trencher, which will conveniently soak up all the juices. Your benchmate, the gruff man-at-arms, immediately grabs the largest piece of mutton with his bare hands and slaps it onto his own trencher, giving you a look that wordlessly says, "Don't even think about it." You select a more modest piece for yourself. Now you face the challenge of actually eating it. You have no fork. Forks were an object of deep suspicion in England at this time, considered a foppish and unnecessary Italian novelty. You have your own personal knife, which you were wise to bring. It's the medieval equivalent of always having your phone on you, a true BYOK culture. You use your knife to cut the mutton into manageable pieces, and then you use your fingers to eat it. This is perfectly acceptable, but it comes with its own set of taboos. You are sharing the pottage bowl with at least 3 other people. It is a grave sin against etiquette to dip a piece of meat or bread you have already bitten into back into the communal bowl. The no double dipping rule, it seems, is an ancient and sacred law. You must also wipe your greasy fingers and mouth on a napkin or your sleeve, if you're less refined, before you take a drink from the shared leather cup or jack that is being passed down the bench. Leaving a greasy sheen on the rim for your neighbor is a fast way to make enemies. You notice that you've been given a simple wooden spoon for the pottage. This too is governed by a peculiar but strict taboo. You use the spoon to ladle some stew onto your trencher, and then you must place the spoon down beside it. It is absolutely forbidden to leave your personal spoon resting in the communal bowl. Doing so would be as strange and unhygienic to them as you leaving your used toothbrush in the punch bowl at a modern party. It marks the whole dish as yours, a deeply antisocial act. Then there's the matter of the salt, the great divider you're sitting so far from. Smaller, less grand salt cellars are placed further down the tables. To get salt, it is taboo to reach across your neighbor. You must ask for it to be passed. Then you must use the very tip of your clean knife to take a small, pure amount and place it on your trencher. Dipping your greasy fingers into the salt is an abomination. As you eat, you gnaw the meat from the bone. What do you do with the remnants? Another taboo. You mustn't just toss the bone onto the floor to join the rest of the debris in the rushes. That is considered slovenly. The proper thing to do is to place the cleaned bone neatly on the side of your trencher. It's a small island of order in a sea of chaos. Then a man across the table lets out a surprisingly loud belch. No one bats an eye. This is one of the more confusing aspects of medieval manners. Spitting, for instance, has rules it's taboo to spit on or across the table, but perfectly fine to discreetly spit on the floor beneath it. Blowing your nose on your sleeve is acceptable if done with a certain decorum. Historians still argue whether the apparent tolerance for noises like belching was a sign of a less inhibited culture, or if the rules were simply different, with a loud belch perhaps being seen as a compliment to the host for a satisfying meal, a view expressed in some contemporary etiquette manuals. It seems some noises were compliments while others were insults. It's a very fine line. At the end of the meal, your trencher, now a soggy, gravy-soaked piece of bread, presents you with a final choice. You could eat it, or in a show of Christian charity, you could give it to one of the servants to be collected for the poor waiting outside the castle gates. You watch as your benchmate unceremoniously stuffs his entire trencher into his mouth. You decide to pass on yours. You've survived the meal without starting a fight or contaminating the salt. In this hall, that counts as a victory. The meal ends not with a signal, but with a slow dissipation of energy. The trestle tables are gradually cleared, and people begin to drift away, the soldiers to their barracks, the servants to the kitchens, the dogs to find a warm spot by the dying fire. The Lord and his family, however, make a more formal exit. They rise from the high table, and a respectful quiet falls over those remaining. This signals the end of the public part of the day. You assume this is your cue to find whatever corner of the stable you've been allotted for the night. but the steward reappears at your elbow. The Lord requires your presence in the solar. He says his voice low and final. Once again, you are being singled out, pulled from the relative anonymity of the crowd and into the inner sanctum of power. You follow him away from the great hall, your footsteps echoing as you climb a tight, winding stone staircase tucked behind the dais. The air grows noticeably warmer and cleaner with each step. He stops before a heavy, iron-strapped wooden door and gives a sharp knock. A voice from within calls permission, and the steward ushers you inside before quietly retreating, leaving you alone. You have just entered the solar, and in doing so, you have breached one of the most significant social barriers in the entire castle. The Great Hall was a public stage. This is the private backstage area. The name Solar itself speaks of this exclusivity, likely deriving from the Latin word solus, meaning alone. This chamber is the Lord's attempt to carve out a space for privacy in a world where almost every aspect of life was communal and on display. The difference from the hall below is staggering. The smoky, cavernous space is replaced by a chamber of surprising comfort and light. A large fireplace with an actual chimney radiates a pleasant, smoke-free heat. The windows are fitted with panels of real glass, a staggering luxury, tinting the evening's last light with faint colors. The floor is not covered in filthy rushes, but made of smooth wooden planks, partially covered by a richly colored carpet that you know must have cost more than a farmer's entire yearly earnings. The air smells of beeswax and dried herbs. This is a room designed not for crowds, but for a family. The lady sits in a high-backed chair doing embroidery with two of her ladies-in-waiting, while the Lord stands by a table examining a scroll. You are an intruder. Here, an anomaly. The first and most important taboo of the solar is that of trespass. You are here by express invitation, and that invitation comes with invisible borders. You are to stand near the door on the edge of the expensive carpet and not move unless bidden. To wander further into the room to approach the fire for warmth or to peer out the window would be an act of shocking, unthinkable presumption. The silence after the roar of the great hall is unnerving. It's a silence filled with unspoken rules. You find yourself focusing on a particular knot in the floorboards as it feels safer than looking at anything else. And that brings you to the next great taboo. You must not touch anything. The room is filled with the Lord's personal effects objects that signify his status, wealth, and literacy. There's a carved wooden chest bound in leather, which you guess holds important documents or money. On a side table, a silver ewer and basin for washing hands gleam in the candlelight. And on a small lectern, there is a book. A whole hand-copied leather-bound book. In your world, this object is worth a fortune. The temptation to just get a closer look at the illuminated lettering is immense, but you suppress it instantly. To lay a hand on any of these objects unbidden would be a violation of the Lord's personal space and property so profound that the consequences are terrifying to imagine. It's the medieval version of you break it, you buy it, except the price is probably your liberty or worse. You can see a smaller door in the far wall. The Lord occasionally passes through it into an even more private space, a small study or closet sometimes called the privy chamber. This quirk of architecture, a room within a room, shows the deepening obsession with layers of privacy. If the Great Hall was for the public and the solar was for the trusted circle, the privy chamber was for the Lord alone. Each door, represents a higher wall, a more stringent taboo. Historians still argue whether the development of private chambers like the solar was driven by a genuine desire for personal comfort and family intimacy, or if it was primarily a political evolution, creating a new, more exclusive stage for power broking away from the semi-public forum of the Great Hall. Watching the Lord conduct his business in this quiet, controlled environment, you suspect it's a bit of both. It's a comfortable prison of etiquette. You must also feign deafness to any conversation not directed at you. The Lord is now speaking in low tones to a clerk about estate finances. You must not appear to be listening. You must be a piece of furniture present but inanimate until you are activated by his attention. Your journey into the castle has taken you through its outer defenses of stone and iron. But here in the solar, you face the inner defenses of silent, invisible, and far more dangerous taboos. Your business in the solar, whatever it may have been, is concluded. The Lord gives you a curt nod of dismissal, and for a moment, you feel a wave of relief. The day of trials is over. But as the family rises, it becomes clear there is one final observance. The Lord is a pious man, or at least he understands the importance of being seen as one, and the day must end with evening prayers. The steward gestures for you to follow the small, dignified procession out of the solar. You are not being invited so much as compelled to attend. Your own piety is now subject to public inspection. This is the final performance of the day, and the stage is the most sacred and rule-bound place in the entire castle, the chapel. You walk through a short covered stone passage and enter a space that is immediately different from any other you have been in. The chapel is cool and silent, the air heavy with the faint sweet scent of incense and beeswax. It is a simple, beautiful room with a high vaulted stone ceiling that makes every tiny sound echo. Light from the setting sun filters through a tall, stained glass window. Behind the altar painting, shifting patterns of ruby and sapphire on the pale stone floor. This is a place built for God, not for comfort. The warmth of the solar and the chaotic energy of the Great Hall are a world away. Here the silence is not just an absence of noise. It is a presence in itself, a holy weight. Upon entering, you see the Lord's family dip their fingers into a stone basin of holy water, a stoop, and make the sign of the cross. You quickly do the same. The cold water, a small shock on your forehead. To omit this simple ritual would be a glaring red flag, an immediate sign of impiety. The household staff and soldiers who are attending the service stand or kneel on the cold stone floor. There are no benches for the common folk. The cold from the stone seeps instantly through the thin leather of your shoes and the cloth of your trousers, a very effective method for encouraging sincere and perhaps rather brief prayers. The Lord and his lady, however, do not join you on the floor. They ascend a small private staircase to a screened-in wooden gallery or pew overlooking the chapel. From there, they can participate in the service, see and be seen without having to physically mix with their lessers. Even in the house of God, the dais of the Great Hall finds its echo. The priest, in his embroidered vestments, begins the service, his voice chanting in Latin, a language you don't understand, but whose cadences are deeply familiar. And here, the primary taboo is absolute: you do not speak. You do not whisper to your neighbor. You do not cough loudly if you can help it. Any sound you make must be part of the collective worship, the murmured Amen at the end of a prayer. To engage in conversation here is more than just rude. It is considered a form of blasphemy, a profaning of a sacred space with your worldly, mundane concerns. God, it is assumed, is not terribly interested in your commentary on the damp weather. Your role is to be a silent, reverent vessel for the divine service. Your eyes drift towards the altar. To one side, on a small table covered in a velvet cloth, is a gilded box studded with semi-precious stones. This is a reliquary, and it is the spiritual core of the chapel. It might contain, so the priests claim, a splinter from the true cross, or a piece of bone from a long dead saint, or a single thread from the Virgin Mary's mantle. This object is charged with immense power and surrounded by powerful taboos. You would never ever dare to touch it. Even staring at it for too long with simple curiosity rather than pure veneration would be seen as deeply inappropriate. The trade in these relics was famously corrupt, a fact that even contemporary writers like Chaucer loved to satirize. But for the believers in this room, the object is holy. Thinking about its likely authenticity feels like a dangerous thought, like you're critiquing the spiritual centerpiece of the whole castle. One careless touch, one irreverent joke, and you haven't just insulted the Lord, you've insulted his saintly protector and God himself. Historians still argue whether the private chapels within castles served a primarily spiritual purpose for the Lord's family, or if they were a calculated political tool, demonstrating the Lord's piety and divine favor to his subjects and rivals, essentially weaponizing devotion. As you watch the Lord's stern, pious face looking down from his private gallery, you can see how it could easily be both. His devotion is a shield, a justification for his power. An affront to him is an affront to the divine order. The service concludes. The priest gives a final blessing, and you file out in the same heavy silence in which you entered. The day is done. You have passed through the castle's many layers of defense, the military, the social, the personal, and now the spiritual. Each has demanded a different form of obedience, a different awareness of invisible lines you must not cross. Now finally, you are released into the growing darkness of the castle courtyard to find a place to sleep. You retreat from the chapel's profound silence back into the dark, damp air of the courtyard. The day has been a relentless series of social and spiritual hurdles, and a deep weariness is settling into your bones. All you want now is a pile of straw to collapse into. A passing servant, noticing your lost expression, takes pity on you and points you towards the stables, where he says a space has been cleared for you. Your path takes you around the back of the great hall, and as you draw near a long, low building, a wave of intense heat and a cacophony of noise spill out from its open doorway, cutting through the night's chill. This is the castle kitchen, and even at this late hour, it is a hive of furious activity. Curiosity gets the better of you, and you pause in the shadows of the doorway to look inside. If the great hall is the castle's heart, this is its roaring, fiery stomach. The room is vast and steamy with two enormous fireplaces, big enough for a person to stand in each one, housing a spit or a bubbling cauldron. The air is thick with the smells of boiled vegetables, spilled ale, old grease, and sweat. This is not the refined, appetizing aroma of the finished feast you witnessed earlier. This is the raw, chaotic smell of production. Scullery maids scrub furiously at blackened pots, and young boys scurry back and forth fetching supplies. Presiding over this entire kingdom of heat and steam is the cook, a large man with a stained apron and a face permanently flushed from the heat. He wields a long wooden spoon like a scepter, and his authority here is absolute. You thought the Lord was intimidating, but he has nothing on a medieval chef during the post-dinner cleanup. You quickly realize that this space has its own fierce set of taboos, entirely separate from the courtly manners of the hall. The first and most unbreakable rule is that you, a guest and an outsider, do not belong here. To step inside would be to invite the cook's wrath. His word is law, his recipes are state secrets, and his kitchen is a sovereign territory. Interfering with his work is a taboo more fiercely enforced than many of the Lord's own. This is a practical necessity. Most large castle kitchens were in fact housed in separate buildings, a design known as a detached kitchen. This was a mainstream architectural choice, primarily to prevent a catastrophic fire from spreading from the greasy, flame-filled kitchens to the main residence of the Lord. From your safe vantage point, you begin to notice the little rituals, the superstitions that govern this frantic workspace. The cook is overseeing a huge pot of something for the next day's meal. He stirs the thick concoction with his spoon, and you notice he is only stirring in one direction, clockwise, or diasail. This isn't just a habit, it's a superstition. To stir widdershins, or counterclockwise, was believed to be incredibly unlucky. It was the direction of dark magic, a way to spoil the food, invite sickness, or even, according to some beliefs, summon a malevolent spirit. A misplaced stir could turn a simple pottage into a cursed cauldron. You can imagine the cook's fury if some witless assistant tried to give the pot a stir in the wrong direction. It would be seen as a direct act of sabotage. Other food-related fears are everywhere. A boy brings a basket of greens to a preparation table, and you see him carefully pick out all the parsley and set it aside. This is a strange but common superstition. It was often considered terribly unlucky to cut parsley, as it was thought to be an herb of death and a favorite of witches. To chop it for the Lord's meal could be seen as inviting doom upon the household. You also recall hearing that hares were rarely served despite being plentiful, because of the widespread belief that witches could transform themselves into the animals. You wouldn't want to accidentally serve up the local sorceress for dinner. It would be a terrible social gaffe, to say the least. Amidst the chaos, you see the cook perform another small ritual. Before a massive trough of bread dough is covered to rise, he makes a quick sign of the cross over its surface, a silent prayer to ward off any demon or imp that might wish to meddle with the yeast. Historians still argue whether these kitchen-based superstitions were genuine folk beliefs passed down through generations of servants, or if they were a form of practical control, with cooks using tales of curses and bad luck to prevent lazy or untrained underlings from meddling with complex recipes. A story about a demon ruining the bread is probably more effective than a simple "don't touch that." A particularly fascinating fear was poison, and while a lord might own a piece of a narwhal's tusk believed to be a unicorn's horn, or alicorn, which would sweat in the presence of poison, the kitchen staff had humbler methods. The cook's favorite spoon might be carved from rowan wood believed to have protective properties, and it would be a huge taboo for anyone else to even touch his sacred poison-warding utensil. You decide you've tempted fate long enough, lingering at the edge of this fiery, superstitious world. The cook barks an order, and a young scullion jumps as if struck. The hierarchy in here is just as rigid as the one in the Great Hall, but enforced with wooden spoons instead of polite condescension. You back away quietly into the darkness, leaving the heat and the clamor behind. The simple act of eating, you now understand, rests on a hidden foundation of fear, ritual, and fiercely guarded secrets. You finally leave the sweltering world of the kitchens behind and step back into the cool night. The directions to the stables are simple enough, but after the large meal and what feels like miles of walking, a pressing biological need makes itself known. You have to find the latrine. In a place this large and complex, you have no idea where to even begin looking. You manage to catch the eye of another servant scurrying across the bailey, and you ask him for directions to the privy or Jake's. He points you towards a tall, narrow tower attached to the outer wall, a place you hadn't even registered as being significant. With a muttered word of thanks, you head towards it, bracing yourself. You have a feeling this is not going to be a pleasant experience. The room you enter at the base of the tower is small, cold, and dark. A single torch sputters in a wall sconce, casting long, dancing shadows. The smell hits you, first a sharp, pungent reek of ammonia and old waste that makes your eyes water. This is the Garderobe, the medieval solution to sanitation, and its name is one of history's greatest euphemisms. The term garderobe literally means robe warding. It's a well-documented historical fact that nobles would hang their expensive wool and fur robes in the shafts of their private latrines. The belief was that the pungent ammonia fumes rising from the cesspit below would kill fleas, lice, and moths. It was essentially a toilet that doubled as a mothball-scented closet, a truly inspired bit of multitasking. As your eyes adjust, you see the mechanism itself, a simple stone bench with a hole carved in it. This hole opens into a chute that runs straight down the exterior of the castle wall, emptying directly into the moat below, or, in some cases, a dedicated cesspit. There is no flush, no water, just a constant chilly updraft from the darkness below. But the biggest shock is not the smell or the simplicity. It is the fact that there are 3 of these stone seats, side by side, with absolutely no partitions between them. And one of them is currently occupied by a weary-looking soldier. He gives you a brief, uninterested nod, and then goes back to staring at the opposite wall. Here, you encounter a taboo that is the inverse of our modern sensibilities. For you, privacy in this situation is paramount. For them, demanding it would be the strange and offensive behavior. Bodily functions were seen as a natural part of life, not something to be hidden away in shame. The communal garderobe was an accepted normal part of household life. To show squeamishness or to wait ostentatiously for the room to be empty would be a social taboo, marking you as overly precious and proud. So you take a deep breath, choose the furthest seat from the soldier, and try to pretend this is the most normal thing in the world. It is perhaps the ultimate icebreaker. Despite the communal atmosphere, there are still rules. It's taboo to linger. This is a functional space, not a reading lounge. You do what you need to do, and then you leave. There's no room for a magazine rack, and no one is interested in idle chit-chat. When you are finished, you look around for something to complete the transaction. You see a pile of hay in one corner and some moss in another. For the wealthy, scraps of old linen might be available, but for the general household, it's whatever is cheap and readily absorbent. Nearby, there is a bucket of water with a stick wrapped in a communal cloth. You decide to stick with the hay. The expectation of cleanliness wasn't about being sterile, but it was a taboo to be needlessly filthy or to leave a mess for the person who follows you. This whole system, you realize, must create a monumental problem at the base of the wall. And indeed it did. the task of cleaning out the cesspits fell to a man with one of the most unfortunate job titles in history, the Gong Farmer. This specialist was hired to haul away tons of human waste, usually only at night, to minimize the olfactory offense to the castle's inhabitants. It was a filthy, dangerous, and socially isolating job. But because it was so unpleasant and so necessary, a gong farmer could actually earn a very decent wage. You imagine it was the one career where no one ever asked to be your apprentice. Historians still argue whether the communal nature of medieval toilets reflected a genuine lack of a concept of bodily privacy, or if it was another reinforcement of the social hierarchy where only the Lord was afforded the luxury of solitude for even the most basic human acts. His private garderobe connected to his solar was a symbol of his status, just like his seat on the dais. Your presence here in this shared, smelly public space is another quiet reminder of your place in the world. The soldier finishes his business, gives another curt nod, and leaves. You are alone for a moment in the pungent darkness, contemplating the strange intimacy you've just shared. You finish up your own business, concluded, and quickly retreat from the cold, malodorous tower. Your journey through the castle's hidden rules has now taken you from the heights of piety in the chapel to the literal depths of the garderobe. You are definitely ready for sleep now. You finally make it to the stables. The air is warm and sweet with the smell of hay and sleeping animals. A space has been cleared for you in a quiet corner, and the pile of straw looks more inviting than the finest feather bed you can imagine. The long day of navigating the castle's treacherous social landscape is over. You have survived the gatehouse, the hall, the solar, the chapel, the kitchen, and the garderobe. But as you burrow into the straw and the castle settles into a deep, quiet slumber around you, let's turn our attention to one final space, a place that as a traveler and a man, you would never be allowed to enter. It is a room as heavily guarded as the treasury, but its walls are made of custom, and its locks are made of honor. We are going to imagine our way into the Lady's Bower. The Bower, or the Lady's Chamber, was the exclusive domain of the Lady of the Castle and her female attendants. It was the Solar's more private, more feminine counterpart. For any man, not the Lord, or a direct family member, to enter this space unbidden would be a taboo of the highest order, a scandal that could ruin reputations and sour alliances. It was a sanctuary, a retreat from the rough, loud, masculine world that filled the rest of the castle. As we slip through the imagined door, the atmosphere is one of serene domestic industry. The air is cleaner scented with lavender from strewn herbs or a pomander. The light from candles and a well-tended fire is soft, illuminating a scene of quiet activity. Several women sit on cushioned benches, their heads bent over intricate needlework, their fingers moving with practiced grace. Another might be softly strumming a lute, while the lady herself reads from a book to her youngest children. This piece, however, is built on a foundation of rigid taboos that govern every aspect of the women's lives. Take their appearance. Modesty was the highest virtue. It was a powerful taboo for a married noblewoman to display her hair openly. It was to be braided coiled and hidden away beneath a veil or an elaborate wimple. The goal was to look naturally beautiful, which then, as now, often required a lot of unnatural effort. Makeup existed. Women used cochineal insects for red lips and a powder of wheat flour or dangerously white lead for a pale complexion. But it had to be subtle. To be visibly painted was the mark of a common prostitute, So the noblewoman's taboo was to wear the mask of virtue while secretly enhancing it. The ultimate goal was looking effortlessly pious and pale, a look that took a lot of work and sometimes involved a touch of light poison. The conversations, too, were strictly policed. The boisterous jokes and loud arguments of the Great Hall were forbidden here. It was a taboo to speak of coarse subjects to curse or to engage in overly ambitious political scheming. Of course, gossip was the lifeblood of the bower, but it was a delicate art. Discussing who was courting whom was fair game. Loudly debating the king's latest military strategy was not. Historians still argue whether the bower was a gilded cage designed to isolate and control noblewomen, keeping them away from political power, or if it was a genuine female power base where ladies could form alliances, manage vast household economies, and subtly influence their husbands and sons away from the public gaze. It was likely both a place of confinement that also became a center for a different, more subtle kind of power. This was also the space where uniquely female matters were hidden away. Menstruation was a topic shrouded in religious and medical mystery, often seen as a mark of Eve's sin, a monthly source of impurity that was never ever to be spoken of openly. A noblewoman would deal with it silently and discreetly. Similarly, many female ailments, from cramps to anxiety to depression, were often dismissed with the catch-all diagnosis of the Vapours, or hysteria, a taboo that invalidated their suffering and wrote it off as a mysterious feminine weakness. Even their entertainment was subject to rules. A hugely popular activity in the bower was listening to readings of chivalric romances, long epic poems about dashing knights and their dramatic love affairs. This was a quirky and vital part of their imaginative lives, one of the few forms of escapism available. Yet it was a monitored escape. A priest might warn the lady that listening to too many stories of Lancelot and Guinevere's adulterous passion could corrupt her morals and those of her attendants. It was like binge-watching a scandalous television series, but with the constant threat of your chaplain confiscating the story for the good of your soul. The bower was a complex world of its own, a soft, quiet, fragrant room built on hard, unspoken rules. It was a pocket of femininity in a man's world, a place of both refuge and restriction. Your imaginary visit ends, and you are back in the stable, the scent of hay replacing the scent of lavender, a world away from the veils and vapors of the lady's private kingdom. You drift in the warm, hay-scented darkness of the stable, your body finally surrendering to a deep and dreamless sleep. But while your conscious mind rests, let us guide your imagination one more time tonight. We visited the feminine heart of the castle, the bower, a place you could never enter. Now we will journey to its masculine soul, a space just as restricted and even more intimidating, the Armoury. This is the other side of the coin, a room governed not by whispers and veils, but by the cold, hard logic of sharpened steel. If the bower was a sanctuary of domesticity, the Armoury is a temple of martial power, and its taboos are just as absolute. Imagine a long, stone-vaulted chamber, stark and functional. There are no tapestries or cushions here. The only decorations are the instruments of war themselves. The air is cold and smells sharply of metal oil and the fine grit of a whetstone. Racks of spears, halberds, and polearms line one wall, their tips gleaming dully in the torchlight. On another wall hang shields emblazoned with the Lord's coat of arms. And standing in silent, menacing rows are the suits of armor-articulated metal shells, waiting to be filled by living men. The atmosphere is one of chilling potential, of violence held in reserve. The first taboo is simple: you do not belong here. This is the domain of knight squires and men-at-arms. For an outsider to wander in would be a profound trespass, like walking into a lion's den to admire the teeth. The most sacred objects in this temple are the swords. A knight's sword was not merely a weapon, it was a symbol of his entire identity. It represented his oath to his lord, his social status, and his Christian faith. This is a mainstream historical fact, visibly expressed in the sword's very design. The hilt with its straight crossguard forms the shape of a crucifix. A knight would often pray before a battle by driving his sword's point into the ground and holding the hilt as a cross. Blades were frequently inscribed with protective religious acronyms or phrases like "In nomine Domini," in the name of the Lord. This imbued the weapon with a holy purpose. Consequently, it was an extreme taboo to touch a knight's sword without his express permission. It was an object so personal, it was considered an extension of his body and his honor. To playfully pick it up would be a shocking breach of etiquette. To draw it from its scabbard would be a direct and deadly challenge. It was a line you did not cross unless you were prepared for the fatal consequences. Another powerful taboo was neglect. A knight or his squire was duty-bound to keep his weapons in perfect condition. A speck of rust on a blade or a dull edge was a sign of sloth and disrespect, not just to the weapon, but to the entire warrior ethos. Armor likewise required constant, laborious maintenance to keep the hundreds of intricate plates clean oiled and rust-free. It's a miracle they had any energy left for fighting after all that polishing. This deep personal connection between a warrior and his weapon is beautifully illustrated by a quirky and fascinating custom, the naming of swords. Much like the famous legends of King Arthur's Excalibur, many historical knights bestowed names upon their favored blades. A name gave the sword a personality, a history, a spirit of its own. It became a trusted companion in battle, not just an inanimate object. It's a bit like naming your car, except your car is also a sacred religious icon that can be used to settle disputes with finality. It would have been a great taboo to speak ill of a famous named sword, as if you were insulting the knight's most loyal friend. The Armoury was also the starting point for pre-battle rituals. Before a tournament or a major conflict, a knight would spend a night in vigil, often in the castle chapel. His armor and weapons would be laid out on the altar before him to be blessed by a priest and purified for their grim work. This ritual washed the violence in holy purpose. Superstition was rife. A sword accidentally slipping from its sheath was a terrible omen. A warrior's journey to the battlefield was a minefield of potential bad luck. Historians still argue whether the complex code of chivalry was a genuine ethical framework that truly restrained the brutality of medieval warfare, or if it was merely a form of class-based propaganda, a romantic veneer for knights to distinguish their honorable violence from the common butchery of lower-class soldiers. Looking at the sheer deadly efficiency of the weapons in this room, you suspect the veneer was very thin indeed. Our imaginary tour concludes. The cold image of the Armoury fades, and you are once again safe in the warm, quiet darkness of the stables, a mere traveler dreaming of things you were never meant to see. You have now glimpsed the two poles of the castle's inner life, the Bower and the Armoury. One, a world of soft power, the other of hard power, both locked away by invisible walls of custom fear and tradition. In the deepest, darkest hour of the night, a sound jolts you from your sleep. It's a sharp cry of pain, followed by the urgent, frantic ringing of a small handbell. You sit up in the straw, your heart suddenly hammering. In the tense silence of a sleeping castle, the sound is alien and alarming. You hear the scuff of running feet on stone, and through a crack in the stable door, you see the flickering light of a lantern moving swiftly across the bailey. Sickness has come in the night. That fear you sensed at the Gatehouse, the terror of disease that hung over every medieval community, has become a reality within these walls. You watch as the castle chaplain, holding his robes up to run, hurries from his quarters, a small satchel in his hand. A crisis is unfolding, and it is governed by a strange and desperate blend of science, faith, and superstition. In this world, medicine is based on the ancient theory of the four humors. This is the bedrock of all healing. The body is believed to contain four essential fluids: blood, which is hot and moist; phlegm, cold and moist; yellow bile, hot and dry; and black bile, cold and dry. Perfect health is a perfect balance of all four. Every illness, from a cough to a fever to a fit of melancholy, is diagnosed as an imbalance and excess of one humor. Feeling irritable and angry, too much yellow bile. Feeling sluggish and sad, an excess of black bile. The cure, therefore, is to remove the offending surplus. The most common method for this is bloodletting. And this is where the leeches come in. You might see a servant running with a small water-filled jar. Inside are the dark, slick bodies of medicinal leeches. They were a physician's precision tool, a way to draw out the hot blood in a controlled manner. But this procedure is itself wrapped in taboo. You don't just apply a leech any time. A physician or a wise barber surgeon would consult an astrological chart. It was a powerful taboo to let blood from a certain part of the body when the stars were misaligned. Each part of the body was ruled by a sign of the zodiac, and to cut into it during the wrong lunar cycle was to risk disaster. This was mainstream medical practice, a fusion of classical theory and astrological belief. But what if the physician's cures fail? What if the patient worsens? This is where the world of taboo becomes even more dangerous. The Church offers the official sanctioned path to healing prayer, penance, and the intercession of saints. The alternative is to seek out folk remedies, the world of wise women and village healers. This is a path fraught with peril. An old woman living on the edge of the estate might know of a herbal poultice that can cool a fever far faster than the priest's prayers. But if her recipe involves an incantation whispered over the herbs, or gathering the ingredients under a full moon, it crosses a terrifying line. It becomes magic, a forbidden art. This is a fascinating gray area. Many effective herbal remedies were passed down for generations, but their association with ancient pre-Christian traditions made them deeply suspect. To be caught seeking such a cure was a taboo that could bring accusations of witchcraft and heresy down not only on the healer, but on you as well. If the struggle is lost and death becomes inevitable, a new and even more solemn set of taboos takes over. The single greatest fear for a medieval Christian was to die without receiving the last rites from a priest. This final confession, communion, and anointing were seen as the soul's passport to the afterlife. It was the family's most sacred duty, and a powerful taboo to fail in this. To let a loved one die unshriven was to risk their eternal damnation. It's the ultimate spiritual FOMO, fear of missing out on salvation. Once death occurs, the rituals continue. The windows of the room are thrown open, even in the dead of winter, a taboo to keep them closed, as the soul must be allowed a free path to depart. The body is then washed, usually by women of the family, and wrapped tightly in a simple linen shroud. It is then laid out on a table for the wake. To leave a corpse unattended before burial was a terrifying taboo, as it was believed an evil spirit could enter and occupy the empty vessel. Family and friends would keep a constant prayerful vigil over the body until it could be taken to the chapel for the funeral mass. Historians still argue whether the church's fierce condemnation of folk medicine was primarily a theological concern about paganism or a more pragmatic effort to monopolize the lucrative business of spiritual and physical healing, ensuring that all crises, from sickness to death, were managed through its official channels. The sounds of panic eventually fade. A heavy silence returns to the castle, a silence that now feels heavier, more final. You lie back down in the straw, sleep now, a distant memory. You don't know who was afflicted, or whether they lived or died. But the incident has been a stark reminder of the fragility of life in this place, and of the desperate ritualized battle that was constantly being waged against the darkness. The unsettling night gives way to a gray and misty dawn. You awaken in the stable to the sounds of the castle stirring back to life, but there's a different energy in the air today. The tense fear from the night has been replaced by a low hum of anxious excitement. Through the snippets of conversation you overhear between stable hands and servants, you piece together the story. The frantic ringing of the bell wasn't for a death, but for a birth. One of the lady's noble-born attendants went into a long and difficult labor, and after a harrowing night, has delivered a child. The news brings a wave of relief, but it is immediately followed by a new and powerful set of anxieties. A new life is a fragile flame, and in this world, there are countless supernatural forces that would love to snuff it out. The birthing chamber itself, much like the lady's bower, you imagined is a sacred and exclusively female space. For a man to be present during a birth was a powerful taboo considered profoundly unlucky and an offense against nature. During the labor, the room would have been sealed like a tomb. Every window covered, every keyhole stuffed with cloth, not just to keep out the chill, but to prevent evil spirits or malevolent fairies from slipping inside to harm the mother or her child. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous things a medieval woman could experience, a leading cause of death. With no understanding of germs, the risk of fatal infection was immense. That both mother and child survived the night is seen as nothing short of a miracle, a victory in a spiritual war. But the war is not over. It has simply moved to a new battlefield, the nursery. This room, where the newborn now lies, is perhaps the most spiritually fortified location in the entire castle. The infant, especially before it can be baptized, is considered to be in a state of extreme peril. It is a human soul, not yet claimed by God, making it a tempting prize for the inhabitants of the other world. The greatest fear is that of the changeling. This was a deeply ingrained superstition throughout England and much of Europe. The belief was that fairies, often depicted as beautiful but malevolent beings, would covet a healthy human child. They would sneak into the nursery, steal the baby, and leave one of their own in its place, a sickly, wizened, and perpetually screaming creature that would drain the family of its resources and happiness. This fear generated a host of protective taboos. It was considered foolish and dangerous to praise a newborn's beauty too loudly or too often, to to exclaim, "Oh, what a beautiful baby was," to essentially send an advertisement to the local fairy population. Compliments had to be couched in careful, almost dismissive language. Every coo and gurgle was monitored for any sign of strangeness that might indicate the switch had already been made. It was the medieval explanation for everything from colic and birth defects to what we would now call sudden infant death syndrome. To ward off this threat, the nursery becomes a fortress of folk magic. The most potent weapon against the fairy folk was iron. It was a universal taboo to leave a newborn unprotected by what was called cold iron. A pair of open iron scissors might be hung over the nursery door, their shape mimicking the cross. A small iron nail or a father's personal knife might be tucked into the infant's swaddling clothes or placed in the cradle. Another powerful protection was salt, a symbol of purity and preservation, which might be sprinkled around the room's perimeter. The cradle itself might be crafted from rowan wood, a tree believed to have powerful protective qualities. A truly quirky custom you might hear about later is the groaning cheese. A large wheel of cheese would be made at the time of the child's birth. Once the mother was recovered from her lying-in period, the cheese would be ceremonially cut and shared with the household. It was a tradition to pass a piece of the cheese over the mother and child for good luck. Historians still argue whether the changeling myth was a genuine supernatural belief system or a tragic social coping mechanism, allowing a community to rationalize and distance itself from the grief of a child's death, or the immense burden of caring for a child with a severe disability. It was easier, perhaps, to believe the creature in the cradle was not your child than to confront the random cruelty of fate. Of all the protections, the most vital was baptism. It was a serious taboo to delay the christening. Until the child's soul was sealed for Christ with holy water and prayer, it was considered a pagan vulnerable and unclaimed. The ceremony would be arranged with great haste, often within just a day or two. You see the child's father walking across the courtyard, his face a mask of pride, exhaustion, and profound worry. The castle has a new resident, but for now, that tiny life is at the center of a storm of fear, hope, and whispered rituals. The castle settles into a new rhythm, one dictated by the needs of a newborn. The household is preoccupied, and this gives you a moment to breathe, to reflect on your own strange and precarious position. You are not a servant, not a soldier, not family. You are a guest. And in this world, being a guest is not a simple social status. It is a formal, almost legal role, governed by a powerful and ancient code. The laws of hospitality are a double-edged sword, offering you protection with one side while threatening you with the other. In a time of dangerous roads and few public inns, the duty of a lord to offer shelter to a traveler was a sacred obligation rooted in both Christian charity and practical necessity. When those gates were finally opened to you, when you were admitted past the murder holes and watchful eyes of the Gatehouse, a contract was silently formed. Your host, the Lord, became responsible for your safety. He is bound by a powerful taboo not to harm you while you are under his roof. He must provide you with food, shelter, and protection from harm. To violate this would be a stain on his honor so deep it might never be washed away. This is why the scrutiny at the entrance was so intense. By letting you in, he accepted a tremendous risk. He vouched for you with his own reputation. But this protection is not a blank check. It comes with a heavy burden of responsibility for you, the guest. Your primary taboo is to never ever overstay your welcome. unspoken custom, and sometimes explicit household rules dictated that hospitality had a time limit, often around 3 days. After that, you were expected to either be on your way or find some way to earn your keep and integrate into the household. To linger past this point, to continue consuming resources without contributing, was the greatest sin a guest could commit. It turned the host's generosity into resentment and put you in a position of great peril. As the old saying, which surely had its roots in this era, goes, fish and visitors stink after 3 days. Furthermore, it is an absolute taboo for you to criticize your host's provisions. You ate the mutton you were served in the great hall, and you are sleeping on the straw you were given in the stables, and you must do so with sincere, visible gratitude. To complain about the food, the drink, or the lodging would be a shocking insult to the Lord's generosity and a black mark against your own character. Your role is one of humble acceptance. You must also curb your curiosity. Asking too many questions about the castle's layout, the number of its guards, or the Lord's finances is a taboo that quickly turns you from a guest into a suspected spy. Your goal is to be less trouble than the hunting dogs, and only slightly more noticeable than the furniture. It's a delicate balance. Even the end of your stay is governed by ritual. When you eventually depart, an exchange of gifts is often expected, a practice that solidified the new relationship. For a wealthy guest, this would involve a significant present, a fine horse, a piece of silver. A poor or stingy gift would be a taboo, an insult to the host's status. For a humble traveler such as yourself, a heartfelt promise of prayers for the Lord's family, or perhaps a small, hand-carved token would suffice. You start mentally preparing your own parting gift, hoping that a very sincere thank you speech will do the trick as you're fresh out of silver goblets. This entire system was a vital part of the social fabric. Historians still argue whether the formal laws of hospitality were a civilizing Christian influence that genuinely fostered safe travel and social bonds, or if they were primarily a pragmatic system of mutual assurance among the nobility, a way to guarantee their own safety when traveling through the hostile territories of their rivals. You spend the day making yourself useful, helping a stable hand mend a leather strap, carrying a bucket of water without being asked. You are performing your side of the bargain, showing that you are not a leech. You feel the unspoken clock ticking. The same sacred laws of hospitality that have sheltered you and kept you safe within these stone walls are the very laws that will soon compel you to face the dangerous roads again. The protection was never meant to be permanent. It was a temporary grace, and that grace is running out. The shadows lengthen, and a new kind of quiet, a different kind of tension begins to fall over the castle. You have one more night to spend within these walls, and you are about to experience the most rigid and fear-laden taboo of all the curfew. As the last light drains from the sky, a deep, resonant bell begins to toll from the chapel tower. This is the couvre-feu, the cover fire bell. This is a well-known historical practice, a signal for every household to bank its fires covering the embers with ash to prevent a stray spark from igniting a catastrophic blaze in the night. But it is also much more than a fire safety measure. It is the signal for the lockdown. You watch from the stable door as the castle transforms. The massive gates you entered, through which have stood open all day, are swung shut with a groaning complaint of wood and iron. A heavy bar is dropped into place. The portcullis descends with a final echoing clang of finality. The castle is now sealed. The guards on the walls who spent the day watching for external threats now also turn their attention inward. Their job is not just to keep enemies out, but to keep everyone in their designated place. After the curfew bell, to be found wandering the corridors or courtyards is a serious crime. The taboo against night walking is absolute. The reasons for this are both practical and deeply superstitious. On a practical level, the castle after dark is a death trap. To save fuel and candles, most corridors are left in pitch darkness. The stone floors are uneven, the spiral staircases are treacherous, and it would be fatally easy to take a wrong turn and tumble down a flight of stairs or into an open cellar. Not to mention, a figure moving in the dark could easily be mistaken for a thief, a spy, or an assassin by a nervous guard with a crossbow. It was a fantastic way to have your journey end with an unfortunate case of accidental perforation. But the practical dangers pale in comparison to the supernatural ones that the medieval mind believed stalked the night. This is when the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead was thought to be at its thinnest. The hours between curfew and dawn belonged to the spirits. Every castle had its ghost stories, tales told in hushed voices around the fire. They weren't just spooky entertainment. They were potent warnings, a way to enforce the curfew with primal fear. The grizzled man-at-arms you shared a bench with might pull you aside and tell you about the phantom of the Grey Lady, the spirit of a lord's wife who was starved to death in one of the towers and whose weeping can still be heard on moonless nights. To hear her cry, he'd tell you, is an omen of your own imminent death. These weren't just ethereal phantoms either. A particularly terrifying and quirky belief was in the revenant. This wasn't a transparent wailing spirit, but a reanimated corpse, a physical body that would claw its way out of its grave to settle old scores, spread disease, or simply wreak havoc on the living. These were, for all intents and purposes, the zombies of the Middle Ages, and the fear of them was tangible and real. It's one thing to worry about a ghost floating through a wall. It's another thing entirely to worry about it breaking down the door. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in ghosts and night spirits was a genuine reflection of a populace's deep-seated metaphysical fears, or if these stories were actively encouraged by the authorities as a form of social control, using supernatural terror to enforce curfews and discourage nocturnal plotting and intrigue. Either way, the effect is the same. The night is terrifying, and the only safety is to be found in your own small designated space behind a closed door, armed with a prayer and perhaps a small cross. You retreat deep into the stables, burrowing into your straw pile. The sounds of the night are magnified in the silence. Every creak of a roof, timber, every rustle of a mouse in the hay, every distant shout of a watchman on the wall. All's well seems to echo with menace. You lie perfectly still, acutely aware of the taboo against moving. You are a prisoner of the darkness, locked in by stone iron and a profound collective fear of what walks the castle corridors when the living are supposed to be asleep. The night stretches on a long, dark tunnel that you must pass through. You have never longed for the dawn so much in your life. The dawn finally breaks, not with a triumphant burst of light, but with a slow gray leakage that seeps into the stable, chasing the deepest of the night shadows away. The terror of the curfew lifts, and a profound sense of relief washes over you. You survived the night. More importantly, today is the day you leave. You can't just vanish, however. Just as your arrival was governed by ritual, so too is your departure. To slip away without a word would be a final unforgivable taboo, an act of profound ingratitude that would mark you as a thief or a churl. You are expected to leave through the front door with all the proper ceremony. After a simple breakfast of bread and ale, you seek out the steward to formally request your leave to depart. It is a matter of respect, a final acknowledgement of the Lord's authority, and a request to be released from his protection. The steward nods and informs you the Lord will see you in the courtyard. This final meeting is not an interrogation, but a closing of the circle of hospitality that began when you first called out to the watchman at the gate. You approach the Lord, who is perhaps overseeing the morning's training, and you offer your deepest thanks for the food, shelter, and safety you were given. He accepts your gratitude with a nod, and then signals to a servant who approaches with a small wooden cup. This is the final ritual, the parting glass, or, as it's often called, the stirrup cup. This is a well-established custom of farewell. Just as you are about to depart with your hand metaphorically on the stirrup of your horse, your host offers you one last drink. It is a toast to your health and to a safe journey. It is a taboo of the highest order to refuse this drink. To do so would be to reject your host's final gesture of goodwill, a shocking insult that would imply you suspected the drink of being poisoned or that you harbored ill will. It would undo all the careful social navigation you've done. So you take the cup of ale, raise it to your host, and drink it down. It's the medieval equivalent of having one for the road, except the road is significantly more perilous. Having concluded your worldly farewell, there is a spiritual one too. The castle chaplain might step forward to offer a brief prayer for your journey, asking God and the relevant saints to protect you from bandits, wolves, and the various misfortunes of the road. You in turn promise your prayers for the health of the Lord's family, and of course, for the new baby. The spiritual accounts are now settled. Historians still argue whether these elaborate departure rituals were born from genuine affection and concern for a guest's welfare, or if they were a final calculated performance of the host's magnanimity designed to indent the departing guest and spread the reputation of the Lord's generosity far and wide. As you look at the Lord's impassive face, you suspect it's a little of both. Finally, it is time. You walk across the bailey, your steps feeling lighter than they have in days. The castle looks different to you now. It is no longer just a menacing pile of stone. You see the windows of the great hall and remember the terror of the seating plan. You glance at the chapel and remember the sacred silence. You smell the distant scent of wood smoke from the kitchens and remember the cook's furious, superstitious energy. You have learned the castle's secret language of taboos. As you approach the gatehouse, you might even perform one last quirky ritual of your own, reading the road. You look for omens in the sky or in the behavior of birds. Is that a raven, a bad sign, or a pair of magpies, a good one? To see a bad omen and ignore? It was a taboo for any cautious traveler. It was like a medieval traffic report, powered by pure superstition. The guards at the gate, the same men who scrutinized you with such suspicion upon your arrival, now give you a casual nod. The great portcullis is raised. The heavy wooden doors are pulled open. You step across the threshold from the ordered, rule-bound world of the castle, back into the wild, unpredictable world beyond. The damp, earthy smell of the countryside fills your lungs. You turn back for one last look at the fortress, then set your face to the road. You have navigated the Gatehouse, the hall, the solar, the chapel, the kitchen, the garderobe, the nursery, the armory, the curfews, and the complex laws of hospitality. You have survived, and so your journey is over. You can let the image of the castle walls fade into the mists of a time long past, leaving the cold stone and the damp English air behind. The weight of all those unspoken rules, the constant vigilant fear of causing offense can finally be set down. You are no longer a traveler in that perilous and uncertain world. You are safe now in the quiet comfort of your own room, in the soft familiarity of your own bed. There are no silent judgments here, no specters in the hallways, no need to worry about where you sit or how you speak. The deep echoing silence of the medieval night is replaced by the gentle soothing hum of your own time. Let the feeling of the rough straw in the stable and the hard stone of the chapel floor dissolve away, replaced by the warmth of your blankets. Allow the flickering torchlight to dim completely, leaving only a comfortable and peaceful darkness. You have listened to the story, and now your only task is to let go, to drift, to allow your mind to become as still and as quiet as the sleeping castle after the curfew bell has rung its last. There are no more trials to face, no more rituals to perform. There is only rest.